Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Katie. Thank you for having me.
All right, so gosh, I feel like I don't know if you've heard this on the podcast, but like I grew up in a very religious family, and I my mother refused to allow me to go to any sex ed classes. So I always felt like I am way behind when it comes to so much about feminine or just female sexual health, menstruation, all of that. And so I'm super excited to talk about all of this, but like I literally had to look up the different menstrual phases before I started this because I was like, I can't like I don't know the difference between follicular and luteal, and I'm sure I can't be the only woman who has that who has that issue. And I
And
am also going to be using the phrase woman, as I do with the podcast, as a kind of catch all phrase for anyone who menstruates or was socialized as a girl. Just moving forward. Okay. Okay, so before we even talk about any of that, I want to hear about your diagnosis because you are ADHD and autistic. Were you diagnosed with both at the same time, or kind of what was happening? How long ago were you diagnosed? What was happening in your life that led you to really think I need to look into this?
all at once and also not at the same time at all. As most folks with ADHD or autism, my whole family has ADHD. I was taken to be diagnosed when I was a kid back in the 90s with my younger brother, who came back. They said he has ADHD, and they said she is borderline. But like as we know now, there's no such thing as a borderline case of ADHD. You have a neurodivergent brain or you don't. But so I went my whole life going, my brother's the one with that issue. I just, I don't know. I can't, I have trouble socializing. I have social problems. Um, and then flash forward to the pandemic, I went viral on TikTok for talking about periods and all of the things that we're probably going to talk about. And I was dealing with autistic burnout without realizing I was dealing with autistic burnout, and the depth of the panic and the meltdowns and burnout that I was going through made me stop and assess and go, there is something really wrong here. I want to look into an autism diagnosis. And where I was lucky that where I went for an autism diagnosis, they also specialized in ADHD. And in my assessment, at the very end, the guy goes, yeah, I would say that you have autism. And I also think you have ADHD just based on everything that's been happening in this conversation. And I went, cool, that actually tracks. So, um, it's like all at once and also not at the same time. Yeah.
Wow. So did you go back to your parents and what was their reaction?
Yeah, it it took my dad a while to come around to it, and he's got his own internalized ableism about it because I also think he has the same thing I do of both diagnoses. So from his point of view, it's he can't accept it in other people because he hasn't accepted it in himself kind of situation. My mom was really accepting very early. She was like, "Oh, this you make sense now," which was really validating. My dad is sensitive to it, but he's not going to go out of his way to acknowledge that these are the struggles that I experience having the brain I do.
Mhm. Interesting. Even the term borderline ADHD makes it sound like it's like, be careful, like you're gonna, if you don't
You could
watch
tip the other
yourself, right?
way if you eat too much sugar. Yeah.
Right? Like again, sort of puts the onus on you as a child to like, shape up. Interesting.
Yeah.
Just the way that could even be the difference is just in we talk so much on this episode or on this podcast about how differently we're socialized, right? And so much of the time with boys it's socialized. I'm like, okay, let's see what kind of help we can get for this person immediately. And with girls it's like, you better watch out, you better get your act together.
I also think that's so indicative of how we raise boys to take all the risks and we raise girls to be perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, so that I didn't know about the viral video. So what was you were just interested already in menstruation
Yeah,
or
and it wasn't just one video, it was the entire account. I gained 90,000 followers in the span of 3 weeks.
oh, TikTok.
Yeah, TikTok, panic times. As a piece of advice to neurodivergent folks out there, think twice before you think, oh, I want to go viral on social media, because especially the notifications as they're rolling in, you need tools to be prepared for that, and I did not have them. Um, but yeah, I was a integrative nutrition health coach several years before the pandemic, and I got really into Elisa Vitti's work, and because she's the pioneer of this kind of biohacking for periods field. I got really into her work, and I was helping a lot of friends deal with their periods at the time. And I was trying to think of something that I could put on TikTok. I was an actor for a while, and all of my actor friends were putting on theatrical things, and I was like, it's the pandemic. I just shaved my head as a form of pandemic panic. I don't want to like sing a song. I want to talk about something that I think is really interesting. So I talked about the difference between the infradian cycle and the circadian rhythm, or the infradian rhythm and the circadian rhythm, which is the menstrual cycle versus, the 24-hour hormone cycle that everybody has. And yeah, the TikTok account exploded.
Wow. Actually, I feel like maybe I saw that video. Um, Were you talking about? I should go back and look at it. I didn't know about it, or else I would have watched it ahead of time. But like, did you go? Were you talking about like work cycles and productivity cycles
That is
versus the
something
like
that
workday? I think I saw this video.
was
That's funny. Um, so you know what, right? Because it's really true when you think about how much of our workday and our weekly productivity cycles and our expectations of ourselves are all based on a 24-hour cycle instead of a monthly cycle. Yeah, I got really into again, I'm not going to remember her name. Christiane. I can't waste time on this. Oh God, what is her name? She's the daughter of a doctor who actually speaks in IIN. Did you go to IIN as well? Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So one
It's
of
funny
the
because I'm also
lectures.
the daughter of a doctor, so
Oh
it
gosh,
must be a thing.
I should have this like written down somewhere because I feel like I reference her a lot when I talk about productivity. Anyway, her whole thing, she was comes at it from much more of a business perspective. Her mother was like a feminine health doctor, famous doctor, and
Mm.
she speaks all about the productivity cycle in terms of our energy and our ovulation cycle, and how there is that time, like half of your time needs to be spent low and internal, and like that is necessary in order to have the manic energized cycle. And it was one of those things that we talk about a lot because so many of us had that pendulum before our diagnosis of feeling like, what's wrong with me when I can't get off the couch, because there's times when I'm doing all the things, and you feel like the time when you're doing all the things should be evidence for always doing all the things, as opposed to
Yeah.
realizing that they're both needed. They're both essential. um so now, okay, so talking about menopause and the menstrual cycle, what do you think in terms of ADHD and autism? What are some of the things that our cycle, like how does our behavior or our thinking or our energy, how does it change from one cycle to the next?
Oof. Um, do you mean the fate? Because you mentioned menopause in your question. Are you talking
Oh,
about
I meant
menopause? Or do you
menstrual.
mean
No, I don't know why I said
menstrual?
menopause. Sorry.
And
We'll get to
okay,
that.
yeah. So it changes big time. First off, it our hormones change our bodies and brains from week to week, just across the board, whether you're neurodivergent or not. And then when you add things like emotional dysregulation, sensory sensitivity, um, dopamine hunger, um, the different phases are going to drastically change all of those things, because we're more sensitive to that sort of stuff. Should I go through the different phases of the cycle and just like mark down what's happening in what in regards to
Yeah.
ADHD and
Oh
autism?
my God. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Cool. Um, so I like to start off with the follicular phase. For folks listening who do not know the different phases of the cycle, it goes your follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, then your period. I do period last, but if you talk to your doctor will use your first day of your period as the first cycle. But anyway, the follicular phase is when estrogen is starting to rise. And with ADHD, it's very important specifically because estrogen helps bind dopamine to brain receptors easier and has even been shown to create more dopamine receptors. So, women with ADHD are going to notice that they don't have as intense ADHD symptoms in the follicular phase when they have higher estrogen than the rest of the time. And the follicular phase is really like, as you mentioned, like it's the reference, the time when we're feeling more energized and we've like we can spin all the plates and everything's fine. I feel like it's when my ADHD and my autism become really more of a superpower. And even more so in the ovulation phase, which is just follicular phase magnified because it's when estrogen peaks and we also get a little bump of testosterone. So we've also got like the grounding of the testosterone asking giving us this drive to do what we set out to do. We're especially with in regards to autism where we may be feeling like social cues aren't our super skill during ovulation, our brains are better primed to read and give out social cues as if it's innate for us. So socializing is a lot easier during ovulation, which is helpful for autism. And then the luteal phase is when everything goes awry. The luteal phase is when estrogen drops and progesterone peaks. And progesterone is a precursor to cortisol, which is the stress hormone. The change in your face. Yes. So when estrogen drops, we are losing that extra helping to get to more dopamine that estrogen was giving us in the first two phases. So for folks with ADHD, this will be the time when we're really scatterbrained. We're really reaching for those like self-medicating fixes, like extra coffee, extra chocolate, extra sugar. Can't sleep our sleeping problems are even worse. And with autism and with ADHD, but sensory issues are going to be a lot worse. Like for me, one of my biggest triggers is a leaf blower, and I can kind of handle a leaf blower in my follicular and ovulation phase. I can walk away and not feel like I'm under attack. But in my luteal phase, as soon as I hear a leaf blower, it is fight or flight. And to exacerbate the luteal phase issues, folks, there's a very strong link between folks with ADHD and having PMDD, which is a grossly undiagnosed, misunderstood condition. So a lot of folks with ADHD have an even worse time dealing with the luteal phase than they even need to because I haven't mentioned this, but we just aren't really studied in terms of women and people who get a period. And then lastly, the menstrual phase is if our hormones have been balanced the whole month prior, then the menstrual phase can actually be a really relaxed and rejuvenating sort of time. It can still feel like ADHD is just constantly dopamine farming. But I lost my train of thought because I'm in my luteal phase. What was I saying?
I feel like the menstrual phase is like the cocooning phase, right?
Yeah,
The
it
like
is.
going
It's,
inward.
yeah, it's definitely the time when, it's easier to lean into like drinking soup and feeling cocooning phase. You nailed it with that explanation. I'm trying to find another way to further explain it, but you nailed it. Yeah.
So the luteal phase. So okay, for me, the luteal phase is when I'm like, "What the fuck is wrong with me? Why am I angry at everybody?
Yeah.
Why can I? Why do I have the concentration of a gnat?" And then my period comes the next day. So I feel like that's like clockwork because I'm terrible at tracking. I know that tracking would be so helpful, but it's also something And this is another thing I wanted to get to too with perimenopause, which is I'm in perimenopause right now, so I will go 3 months without a period right now in this phase of my
Right.
life. So I don't know how do you track your period if you have an irregular period?
There's a difference between having an irregular period because you're in perimenopause and you're having an irregular period because you have a hormonal imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
Like me at 31, I could be going through perimenopause. I'm not, but if I was having a irregular cycle, it would be because my hormones are out of whack, and I could fix it through biohacking means, food, sleep, lifestyle changes. With perimenopause, it's a little different because that's exactly what's supposed to be happening. Um, as fun as that sounds. With tracking for perimenopause, I think the best course of action is really like taking it day by day, and doing exactly like as you've noticed. I start to feel this way and then I get my period. So like you've already got the internal signals, but because it's supposed to be kind of random and chaotic as your menstrual cycle is kind of tapering off, there isn't going to be a way that you can calculate next when your period will be coming, or even if you are still ovulating. And I think that's like the best that can be done with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think for me personally, one of the things that's been really helpful about the ADHD diagnosis is just having a lot more grace with like, if I'm reacting a certain way, there's probably a good reason, right? So even when I talk about not getting off the couch, I used to get really frustrated with my low executive function days. And now I'm kind of like, oh, right. I probably was working really hard on something, so I'm going to enjoy and lean into this day of rest, right? And like,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily plan for the rest because I'm terrible at planning and tracking, but when it's happening, I'm not going to like get angry at myself if I can't. If I'm having a really low productivity day, I'll just be like, okay, I surrender to this day. I might as well
Yeah.
enjoy it, and having faith that the productivity comes back.
Yeah. I also like to go about those days thinking about what's the bare minimum that I have to do. Um, because like we don't live in a world that allows we like as you said brought up before, like we don't live in a world that allows for the cyclical kind of living. So we really need to make that space for ourselves, and it's really helpful when you're able to foresee that happening, but that's also you have to you have to be in a time, you have to be in it your the phase of your life when your period is regular, and you also need to have balanced hormones so that it is regular, which is really hard. There's a very small group of people who have that going on because we don't have a lot of support for people who get periods. Um so I say, yeah, go. That sounds like a great way to go about it, is just have your high functioning days and have your really low executive dysfunctioning days, and go, what's the minimum have to do, and take off for the rest.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's easier said than done. I feel like I'm very privileged as a self-employed person that I can do that. But
I would think it would be harder being self-employed because you are the whole paycheck and kit and caboodle of everything. Like being self-employed, you end up spinning all of the plates yourself, right?
That is true. And I was going to say, yeah, oh God, we're going to get into this. Yeah. Like, cause I'm like, well, it's true. Like, a lot of the stuff about being self-employed means I work 7 days a week because I never know when I'm going to have that productivity. And sometimes I just have to go with it. And it's been really difficult to like plan weekend breaks, and plan, speaking of burnout too, right? Like that's
Mhm.
something I think people who are self-employed experience a lot, especially neurodivergent. And what the last time I experienced burnout, I didn't have my period for 6 months, and it didn't occur to me until after I got better and got it back with a vengeance that I was like, oh, this must have been related to. Is there any kind of research into burnout and lack of menstruation?
There,
Or have you
not
even
that I
noticed?
know of. I do know that there's a very strong correlation between lack of amenorrhea, not getting your period, and stress,
Mm-hmm.
which I mean that is burnout.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen any research explicitly tying burnout to amenorrhea. But again, we aren't studied nearly enough. They've only started including people with periods into, or women in studies is, I think it was like 2016, which is not very long ago in the grand scheme of things at all. And even then, they will mainly use postmenopausal women instead of women who have periods. So finding our research is few and far between.
Now, the other thing I was curious about when we were talking about moods and cycles, is how do our meds affect our phases, if at all? Has there been any research into that you know of, in terms of any kind of psychiatric or psychotropic medication? Because I know that like one of the things I like about my SSRI is the fact that it really like makes me even keel and takes away a lot of that edge, especially when it comes to like social anxiety. But the flip side is that I feel like I'm kind of dead inside most of the time. Like I've lost that the pendulum that I really miss, right? Because I really, especially as an entrepreneur, like I miss having a lot of that excitement that I used to have. I feel like the SSRI really takes the edge off of that, and I'm curious if there's been any research into how psychotropic medication affects our phases.
I haven't read much on it. They're still working on studying the different types of birth control and how that actually affects our menstrual cycles. But I do know SSR, so some types of birth control put us in such a deep state of stress that we don't even respond to stress, which I do believe is also kind of how SSRIs kind of work, like it shuts down your stress response.
Mhm.
Um, so I would imagine that there is definitely a very intricate something going on there, but I would really love for us to study what it is.
I know, right? Well, okay, so now I want to also talk about so you have all sorts of wonderful books and you have a planner too, which I think is super cool.
Mhm.
I was looking at the Superpowers Planner, and I love the fact that it's got like movement suggestions and different exercise suggestions for different phases. And but also is there nutritional stuff in the planner, or is
Yeah,
that separate? Okay,
no,
should
that's in
what should we
there.
talk about first? Let's talk about the Superpowers Planner. How did you come up with that? It's awesome.
Thank you. I came up with that because I needed it myself. And there was a strong saying in the theater community that I was in that the world doesn't need you to like create big amazing things. The world needs you to put into it what you need. So because I needed this, I made a PDF form for myself, and my collaborator for my company, Unleash Your Superpowers, Tara Lynn Steele, she was before we made the company, she came up to me and was like, "Hey, I see you're going viral on TikTok, which I told you you would anyway. I think we should make this into a business." And I was like, "Oh, cool. I made a planner for myself." She said, "Great, let's make it real." So she's a functional range mobility specialist. So all of the movement pieces are from her, and all of the breathing things that are in there also from her, and all of the food and lifestyle aspects are for me. So we came together to create a superpower team for helping you unleash your superpowers. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of holistic approaches to treatment. And the okay, so then you also then have the book, Your Toolbox to Unleash Your Superpowers, which the two
Mhm.
of you also wrote together, which talks about some of the stuff we just talked about now. Is there anything that we haven't addressed that's in the book? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What should we? Yeah,
We,
it's a book.
yeah.
Where do we
Um,
start?
the,
Okay. Good. I'm basically trying to think of a good segue to talk about nutrition, and I'm not
okay.
doing a good job. So let's just talk about nutrition.
Sure.
Um, so what did you notice when you were talking about foods for different phases of your cycle? Those are some of the videos I have seen of yours where how did you kind of get into that research, and let's go over some of the foods that to embrace or avoid during different phases.
Yeah. I don't remember how I got into it specifically, but I do know I really gravitated once I found it, I really gravitated towards keeping it in my life because being AuDHD, I love a routine, but I hate sticking with a routine. I love making new routines, and having a different grocery list that I had to utilize, or different meals to make for different weeks of my life, like in rotation, like menstrual phase, we're buying this and we're making this. Follicular phase, we're buying this and we're making that. It made grocery shopping, feeding myself 10 times easier. And that's why it stuck with me so much, and why I talk about it so much. All of the TikToks you've apparently seen. Thank you for watching those, by the way. Um, so yeah, the different phases and what they need. In starting again with the follicular phase, which again, right after your period ends, that's when the follicular phase starts. Follicular phase needs uh, complex carbohydrates, citrus, fermented foods, and what's the other thing? Micronutrients. So really micronutrient dense veggies. The follicular phase is a time when we're kind of like sponges, both symbolically, mentally, and physically. Like we can learn to do a handstand in a week instead of 2 months if we tackle it in the follicular phase. And similarly, our bodies are more micronutrient absorbent during that time. So if we pack in all of the micronutrients in our follicular phase, then come much later down the line in the luteal phase, when our body is like, our immune system doesn't matter because we have a period to get ready for, we are less likely to get sick. So all of the things that you would think would keep you healthy and strong, packing that into the follicular phase is a perfect time for that. Um, the follicular phase, I don't want to jump ahead, but I'm going to. The follicular phase is kind of like the luteal phase in that it's a time when you might be reaching for sugar a lot, and it's different. So in the luteal phase, we're reaching for sugar because of the ADHD, especially if you have ADHD, because of the ADHD issues of needing that dopamine, needing that little kick to just kick you out of the executive dysfunction, get you off the couch, get you doing something. In the luteal phase, we might be reaching towards sugar because we need more complex carbohydrates. And if we are not getting enough energy and electrolytes, then we will reach for sugar, which are going to make us feel like we're getting those electrolytes and that energy that would be coming from a complex carbohydrate. And healthy fats. That's the other thing. I knew I was forgetting one. So follicular phase is healthy fats, micronutrients, fermented foods, citrus, and I said micronutrients and complex carbohydrates.
Oof,
Specifically,
all the things. Okay.
yeah. The ovulation phase is just like the follicular phase in terms of what it needs. A lot of people notice that they have less of an appetite in the ovulation phase, and that is because during ovulation, our bodies are more apt to burn our own fat stores. So we have less of an appetite. Um, that really just means that if you feel like eating less, don't feel like you need to eat more just because you ate more last week. You're fine. Your body knows what it needs. And that's those first two phases. Let me know if I'm going too fast or if I'm jumping around. I am in my luteal phase and my scatterbrain is a scattered. Um, then we have the luteal phase. The luteal phase is where everything that we think that we assume to know about health, science, and nutrition kind of goes out the window because of how progesterone, those high levels of progesterone turn into cortisol so quickly. We need a lot of protein. We need a lot of like root veggie complex carbohydrates because that's low in sugar. And this is important for folks with ADHD, especially, is we are more insulin resistant. So when we have a donut for breakfast, the donut is going to affect our blood sugar levels way more than any other time of our menstrual cycle. So starting off our day, the luteal phase is the problematic time, but it's the time to start off your day with protein instead of a coffee right away and water. Like get yourself at a stable level. And then if you still feel like you need the coffee, drink the coffee, but don't start your day off with it. And that's kind of about it for the luteal phase. We just need a lot of protein, a lot of complex carbohydrates, and to downplay our sugar. And the other thing about the luteal phase is that our metabolism is higher. We need something between 50 to 500 extra calories a day, which is why we end up we need more food, but not more sugar. We need more complex carbohydrates and protein because and that it really all comes down to managing our blood sugar because the protein is going to stabilize blood sugar and the complex carbohydrates are going to stabilize blood sugar and and cushion the stress response from the upped cortisol. Does that make sense?
I mean,
You
as
look
much as
very
it can.
pensive.
I'm like, as much as it can. I'm getting overloaded with information. But I'm going to listen to this episode over and over and over again because I feel like this is so helpful.
Yeah.
And like you, like we were saying, like I love the idea of just having this sort of stuff mapped out. And why don't we? Like, this is the thing that gets me frustrated. Is like why don't we know this stuff? And why isn't it sort of more mapped out in this way? It's so helpful.
Because
'Cause,
we're not men.
yeah.
So there. But I will say we at Unleash Your Superpowers, my collaborator and I, we made a recipe subscription to help people work through this because every month you get a grocery list, recipes that you can make for it, and after a couple months of that, you have an entire cookbook of food that you can reach for that is going to be sectioned out by whatever phase in your cycle you're in. Because it is important.
I know. Yeah, that's amazing. We were going to get to that.
Sorry, I jumped out.
No, I saw that on your website too. I thought that was really cool. Does it change depending on where you are in the world too, in terms of your regional environment?
It should. I think we do set it up though so that it's seasonal. So like if and like conventional grocery store kind of seasonal. So like
Right?
tomatoes.
You're not telling me to eat a lot of berries in December and that kind of thing.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Um,
Or
okay.
in winter, because if you're in Australia and it's December, you might have a ton of berries at your disposal.
Right? Okay, and so then for the menstrual phase, is that the ice cream phase? When do we get to the, the ice cream and chocolate phase?
The chocolate in moderation phase might actually be. Oh wait, chocolate phase is the menstrual phase, yeah. Because we do need more magnesium in that phase. Um, so that's your chocolate phase. The ice cream phase is please manage your sugar levels the rest of the month, but indulge because taking care of your emotional health is just as important as taking care of your physical health. That's the ice cream phase.
Gotcha.
Um, maybe ovulation, but depends on how sensitive to sugar you are.
Mhm.
And menstrual phase is the chocolate phase. It's also the purple foods phase, which is a weird category, but at the same time, everything with purple foods has this type of polyphenol that is very helpful for a body that is actively shedding an entire inner lining of an organ. Um, so it's chocolate if you want it, which I'm sure everybody does because it's chocolate. Purple foods, seaweed. Seaweed has all of the micronutrients that we are actively losing by shedding our uterine lining. Um, and there is one more, seafood, but not like salmon and tuna seafood, more like clam, shellfish, octopus kind of seafood, the kind of stuff where you eat it and you can taste the salty. And that works a similar way to the seaweed, where it's got a lot of the things that we're losing as we're actively bleeding.
Cool. So we're not looking for the sodium. We're looking for what is the other ingredient that you were talking about in seaweed and seafood?
Um, Magnesium, potassium. I don't remember.
Okay. Um, that is amazing too. So now, so this is all part of biohacking. Actually, we probably should have said at the beginning what biohacking really is for people who don't listen to Huberman's Lab. So what in your term, how would you define biohacking?
I think there are really two types of biohacking, and I think it depends on who's doing it. I think if you are a cis, able-bodied, neurotypical man, um, biohacking is bigger, best, faster, better, stronger than the next guy. Whereas I think if you are neurodivergent or a woman or someone who gets a period, or disabled in any way, biohacking is using what resources are available to you to get yourself to the level that society expects us all to be at. It's kind of helping yourself help yourself, uh, with the means that you can control, because our society, our system wasn't designed for to support anybody who isn't a cishet white able-bodied man. Um, so it's getting us to help ourselves, because the system won't. And while the system should, that doesn't mean that we should be at the mercy of it just because it doesn't.
Right? Absolutely. I think, yeah, in its most literal sense, I think it really is just how can you, like we were talking about, how can you kind of holistically approach how to be your best self in all ways, which makes a lot of sense. It just feels like it's been taken over by douchebags. Uh, and I feel like the same way about the term superpower, right? I mean, I think superpower can sometimes feel to many people like it's positive, toxic positivity, right? Where it's like ADHD. When we talk about ADHD being a superpower, it's a phrase I feel like it's very can be really problematic sometimes when it's like, let's ignore all of the struggles that have led you to this diagnosis and let's focus on all the things that you're great at. But at the same time, like in the literal sense, there are some fantastic sides of ADHD if you can listen and pay attention and tune in and honor your cycle and your cyclical energy. It can be pretty amazing and it can feel like a superpower. It's
Yeah.
just how do you get there? And like I said, paying attention and keeping track are not things that I've ever been good at. Um, so now in terms of, so did we cover everything? We covered the planner, the book, and the recipe. So that's a monthly subscription. That's super cool.
Yeah.
And then everybody gets recipes and recipe lists or
Mhm.
like ingredient lists.
I think it's 4 recipes per phase, so that's 16 recipes, with a grocery list per week.
That is so awesome. Is there like a community involved in it, or is it just emailed to your?
Not yet. We are
Yeah.
working on that. Our next project that we're looking at is working on an app, and also changing our website so that there is a community element because we recognize that that's really going to be very helpful for people who use our services.
Right? Yeah. Did you still work individually with people as a coach?
Yes, I do coaching through Unleash Your Superpowers still. My hours are really limited in terms of what I can do because I am currently in law school. So
Oh, that's right. How long have you been doing that?
law school,
Yeah.
I'm at my 3rd year now, so it's my last year.
So were you diagnosed before you went started?
I was diagnosed as I was deciding to go to law school, and I decided to go to law school in what I feel is a very my brand of ADHD kind of way, where my mom said, "What about law school?" And I went, "Huh, yeah, why not?" and did it.
What do you want to specialize in? Do you know yet? Excuse me.
I no, you're fine. I want to go into policy making. I am obsessed. It might be the combination of my neurodivergence. I'm obsessed with systems and making them equitable for everybody.
Yeah, I feel like we talk a lot about social justice and neurodivergent drive for social justice and that kind of empathic quality, but also burnout and overwhelm. And how do we deal with those two at the same time? Oh, that's so cool. So you also like to collect certifications and degrees, which I think is another neurodivergent quality. Just like that idea of like, why not? Um, but yeah, no, that's super cool. I'm always fascinated because I never would have gone back to grad school had it not been for my ADHD diagnosis. Because I'm like now I can feel like I can do it, whereas
Yeah.
I don't think I could have. I don't think I ever would have uh, had the confidence in myself to do it beforehand. So now, are you close with your brother? Is he? How has he reacted? Has he been diagnosed with autism as well, or is there? Do you feel like he might? I guess that's a little personal for for a podcast, but like, do you? How has this? Has he? I guess how have your conversations changed around neurodivergence?
Yeah. He thinks he outgrew his ADHD.
Okay, all right.
That tells you a lot. Whereas, so I'm the oldest of 4. My sister, below both of us, just below both of us, she has ADHD. She's very vocal about having ADHD. She also went to law school. Um, she's a traditional student. I took a while, so she already graduated, but she started a disability club at her school because folks with ADHD, it's also a disability. We talk about me and her talk about neurodivergence a lot. And actually she said she was studying me for a year because she suspected I had autism. Um and when I because we watched the Hannah Gadsby special where she talks about her own autism diagnosis, and my sister had this moment where she was looking at Hannah Gadsby talk about autism and then slowly turned to me with a light bulb going off. Um and I talk about it with my mom all the time because my mom has ADHD without my mom and sister both have ADHD without autism, and I talk about ADHD with them all the time and my autism with them all the time because they have this very intense need to understand people and empathize and all of the underutilized soft skills that we uh now associate with women with ADHD.
Yeah, see, this is where I get so confused about what we're even talking about sometimes with ADHD. Because oftentimes, like, I feel like, are we talking about a certain type of brain that has ADHD and thinks a certain way, like the way we talk about autism? Or are
Mhm.
we talking about ADHD as like as behaviors that exhibit struggle when you're in environments with a neurodivergent brain that aren't friendly to you, right? So I'm like, if you figure out your cycle, if you lean into your strengths in certain times and lean, if you live a life of that of acceptance, and you live in an environment that is helpful to your ADHD at all times, and you're not necessarily quote unquote struggling, do you still have ADHD? You know what I mean? Like, because we look at ADHD so often in terms of the deficits. Um, because then I'm sort of, that's when I start to feel like, well, wait a minute, are we actually talking about autism in terms of the brain and the thinking and that kind of thing? Where do you feel like your autism and ADHD don't intersect? Or like, if you're looking at your sister and your mom and saying they don't have autism, what
Mhm.
are the differences for you? Because
Mm,
I find it so difficult to, I feel like that's the autism in me, which is like I need to know exactly how to characterize all
where's
of
the
these
line
things, and there's
drawn?
too much
Yeah.
ambiguity.
Um, the most obvious difference for me when I think about my mom, sister, and myself, with them having ADHD and me having AuDHD, they socializing is innate for both of them. And for me, I had to study my peers like a field scientist for a year where I made rules for myself. And for that, from there, I was able to understand. But the learning curve in socializing is way steeper, in my experience of autism. And I have a cousin who also is autistic, but thinks he has ADHD. He was diagnosed in the 90s, and he wasn't Sheldon Cooper, so they didn't know what to do with him. It's like one time when the ADHD diagnosis is incorrect. But he also same social issues, very black and white thinking, and I'm at the point where I do more gray thinking than black and white thinking. But if I go back to childhood me, the black and white thinking, the this is the rule, we're not breaking the rule, we are following the rule, and um that need for hard, clear-cut structure, um, is not something that I see in my mom or my sister, but that definitely exists in me and my cousin, for example.
Mm, that's a great way of putting it. That's true. Yes, I can see that in certain people when I talk to women who sort of are just ADHD, quote unquote. Because I always laugh now. I'm like, I feel like ADHD might be the gateway diagnosis for most of us. Um, but so I'm always thinking about like what is the difference with somebody who just has ADHD or also has autism, and that's actually a really interesting point. I would kind of right now I've just gone back to school, so I'm like diagnosing all of my teachers and all of the people in my class. Are you
It's
doing
fun.
that with your
It's fun.
professors?
It's especially fun when they listen and you're right and it changes their lives. I have I call her a half roommate because she's only here a couple of days a week. But when I first met her, I was like, a lot of the things you're doing, like that seems like very ADHD to me. And I wasn't saying you have ADHD, but I was saying like the behavior she was doing. She was like, huh. And she took it to her doctor, and it has completely changed her life having an ADHD diagnosis. She went through a very traumatic last year, and she said, I have no idea how I would have gotten through all of that if I didn't know that my brain works differently and I need different things to cope. I was like, that's so cool. I was right.
I know that is amazing, and it is absolutely life changing, and it's really hard to articulate why, right? Like, because I'm also sort of like, why does this feel like such a novel concept
Mm,
to think about ourselves in terms as being an individual, and have needing to separate, or needing different approaches to thinking. It shouldn't be that novel.
yeah. I've seen a lot of things. I've seen autistic advocates or activists on Instagram who have said like that really sort of relates to the stigma of having ADHD or autism, because these diagnoses have only been something that anybody could have for like a decade. Whereas if you go as far back as even the 90s, having autism or ADHD was, well, that fucked up kid, you know, like he's not doing well in school. Um, and it was only diagnosed to boys who weren't achieving what they thought they should be achieving. Um, and the autistic activist, one of the posts that I saw that I think really summed it up really well was like, there's such a difference between there's a difference in perception between saying I'm autistic, so I need some downtime while at this party, versus I have social anxiety and the lights are too bright for me. Like people have a completely different perception of saying I'm autistic versus I have social anxiety, and one is well received and people relate to it, whereas the other people go, oh, that's on you. That must be really hard for you. And I think it also relates back to how we center able bodies and able minds, and how when somebody is disabled, we throw them in the pile with the other and say, well, shrug your shoulders. That's about it. All we can do for them.
Right. And I think also there's so much of a subjective view of struggle too, right? Like I think there's a lot of
Mm,
that idea of like, well, you're not struggling enough, or or you mask too well, and so it's not obvious how much you're struggling. And I think that's such a fascinating conversation in the social context, right? Of like, how much should you or shouldn't you be struggling? But I feel like there's so much resistance to the increase in autistic diagnoses in for adults. There's like a real backlash from like parents of autistic children who are like, how you don't have autism. This is what autism looks like, and it's like
yeah.
this resistance to expand the viewpoint of the spectrum of autism as though it's going to reduce their help, or it's. I think some people actually thrive on the stigma in some ways, right? Or the stereotype.
Yeah.
Like there are certain populations that need that stereotype because it feels like it validates their struggle. Whereas if more people are coming out and especially self-diagnosing with autism, I haven't been formally diagnosed. I lost my train of thought again. I think it was just this idea of like, I don't know what I'm trying to say even. I think it's just this idea that it's somehow going to, it threatens the gravity of autism or something. I don't know. It's an interesting time, I think, for this, for like, how do we define it and what are we even talking about? Because I feel like I have that question a lot of the time, which is like, is this even ADHD, or are we just talking about like regular quirks that everybody has, like social anxiety or whatever, and so if we bring all of that under the ADHD umbrella, are we somehow diluting the ADHD diagnosis?
Yeah.
But
I have that
I don't know.
conversation with my sister a lot, actually, especially recently, when because there was the resurgence in official diagnoses, and when they ran out of, I forget which medication it was, but they were running out of meds, and people were popping up on social media going, hey, my meds didn't work, I think they are placebo pills. um and my sister was very upset about it. She had a friend who was thinking that she might have a ADHD diagnosis, and my sister felt like if she has ADHD, then that invalidates how hard I, being my sister, has to work to pay attention in a meeting. Sitting through law school, somebody taps her pen and she would completely lose her ability to focus through the whole class. She was like, it's not fair that my friend can focus through class and is doing just fine, but she thinks she has ADHD because she gets anxious sometimes, and can't focus when she gets home. I think also with so much of self-diagnosing of not self-diagnosing, but education about ADHD seems to be coming from TikTok, which I think is totally fine. It's a lot of people sharing their experiences and a lot of people who are studying this actually sharing what they are finding. I think it's really cool. But there's so many people who are on TikTok who might not have ADHD, but they're engaging with an app that kind of simulates ADHD because you've got the constant scroll and there's it forces your brain to focus, to have less and less of an attention span with the algorithm that they shoot out of like shorter videos get seen to more people, get more eyes and all that sort of stuff. And for a lot of people, especially people who don't have ADHD, that's going to trigger burnout a lot faster. So they might be sitting there being, wow, I can't focus on anything for more than 3 seconds because that's how long the videos I've been watching are. And now I'm burnt out because I've been overstimulating myself because I don't have a brain that's made for this depth of speed. And my sister, this was actually my sister's theory that like TikTok is kind of stimulating ADHD for people and encouraging self-diagnosis in it when there isn't one to begin with. I think it's a little more complicated than that because everybody's got their own unique experiences and history to it, and I don't want to invalidate self-diagnosis.
That's why I know, right? That's why I'm like, it's
Yeah.
a fascinating time to be discussing all of this because I'm also like, I do feel like there are even, there is the genetic component, but I do think our brain wiring changes based on trauma or experience, right? And so,
Yeah.
what is to say that spending an inordinate amount of time on your phone scrolling through an app like TikTok is going to change your brain wiring?
Yeah.
And so, while I don't think it causes ADHD, I wouldn't go that far. It does feel like we're going through some major evolutionary changes in terms of who we are as human beings with these devices in our hands.
Yeah. And then there's also,
Fascinating.
then there's also the element of like there's other diagnoses that can fit different overlaps of neurodivergence. Like I took a test to see if I had CPTSD and I scored, they said, oh, according to this test, you do have CPTSD. But I talked about it after with my therapist, another therapist that I've been seeing, and they agreed that everything that I had checked yet, like met the criteria for, was also very much explained by having ADHD or autism, which we already knew that I had. So they were like, we don't think you have CPTSD, but if you were self-diagnosing, it'd be very easy for you to, or if you didn't realize that you had AuDHD first, it'd be very easy to think that you had CPTSD instead. And the treatment for both of those is very different.
Right, yeah. But again, it's like, well, how do you even determine the trauma experienced of a life undiagnosed? Growing up
Yeah.
neurodivergent and not realizing it. There's so much trauma in there and repetitive. So, I mean, I guess whatever diagnoses, I think one of the things that a lot of people, at least a lot of neurodivergence experience, is that these diagnoses aren't pathological. These diagnoses are information that is very helpful in terms of how we live our lives, right? It's really validating. And so depending on what the diagnoses are, I mean, yes, treatment can be different in terms of medication and therapy, but I think also like a lot of the time it's just giving you more clarity and places to research and ways in which you can come back to this idea of like harnessing your superpowers and leaning into
Yeah.
your strengths and all the way that we talk about like how do I understand myself better and how my body works from one day to the next so that I can stop waking up feeling like a piece of shit or frustrated with myself and start understanding like why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. Agreed.
Like how we brought that back.
Yeah.
Gosh, I'm sorry I didn't ask you all the questions I prepared you for, but I do want to ask you if you had another name for ADHD, would you call it something else?
So I thought about this and I think I would call it like the warrior's brain. I listened to a podcast many years ago where somebody it was like a high-end Marine or something like that. Like he was like high specialist in the military, and he was talking about ADHD. And he was saying that he would want the guy with ADHD next to him on the battlefield because our brains are able to keep up with the level of stimulation that is on a battlefield. So we don't go into shock. Our reaction time is faster, like, with that whole C cup, grab cup at the same time sort of thing. And I take a lot of pride in thinking about how my ADHD family, because my mom's whole side of the family, ADHD is rampant. I take a lot of pride in thinking about how my ancestors were probably the warriors who protected the village and took care of everybody in a very cool way that not everybody's brain can handle. So I would call it that, because I think that's what it's evolutionary very helpful for. It's helpful for a lot of things, but I think that's a very strong specialty that our brains are uniquely suited for.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, I'm gonna butcher this, but I feel like isn't there that famous quote which is like, we are our bodies are from are from thousands of years ago, and but we're living in modern times. There's some kind of quote about that.
It's like we took millions of years to evolve into the bodies we have, but we are expecting our bodies and brains to exist in a civilized state that's only existed in the blink of an eye in the grand scope of human evolution.
Right? Yeah.
That's not the quote, but that is the gist.
Right? I'm going to look it up. I'll put it in the show notes. That's what I'm like. I'm going to put all this stuff in the show notes because I can't remember the name of the woman. I'll have that. That'll be in the show notes.
Yeah.
And I'll put a link to your book, and your monthly recipes and your planner, the Superpowers Planner.
Yeah.
And I want to send me your TikTok video because I want to put the link to the viral video. Or is it pinned on your, pinned on your,
No, it is the first video on the account, which is way down there.
It was your first video? Are you kidding me?
First video.
Wow. Wow. Okay, that's awesome. Nice introduction to TikTok.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, thank you. I know I threw a lot of questions at you, so thank you. I really appreciate this information. Like I said, I feel like this is going to be one of those episodes I'm just going to have to keep playing over and over and over again when I'm like, wait, what is happening to me right now? Because this is such important information, but I do feel like this is the kind of information that's really difficult to retain for whatever reasons. Maybe it's the fact that we just need a lot of that, need it in front of us. I don't know, but I always find it I feel like, I don't know why it eludes me. I blame my mom, but maybe there's more to it. All right. Well, thank you, Korra. This was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your information and, all of the stuff that you are doing with, Unleash Your Superpowers. I'll definitely have a link to that in the site. Anyway, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been great.
Thank you for having me on. This has been a great conversation. So, yeah.
All right. Take care.
Bye.